Turn on.
Cause the weakest man see how he
Tune in.
The Satanist, the black magician, is not seeking that kind of
I think we're great control. If you keep the calculations,
much which I didn't know
more or
when
less
I was
accuracy, you'll survive
All right, well, let's just do this. My apologies for finding this out right now. I thought demonetization didn't mean they were killing my live streams as well. So I will just upload the interview afterward to both channels, if that's all right with you. And
Sure.
we'll just press forward. Hopefully we don't have any more technological glitches. So anyway, this is Logos Media's UnSpun number 157. I'm here with Dr. Shiva Ayyadurai, and we're going to be discussing the climate of science and Dr. Ayyadurai's work. And we've got some interesting discussion to go through today. And you are the inventor of email, as well as you've got an interesting background. You're a politician as well. You've tried to run for U.S. Senate. You are a scientist, and you are into health and nutrition and all sorts of things. So anyway, I wanted to have you on a guy that listens to my show reached out to me. Alan reached out to me asking if I would have you on. And so, I wanted to bring you on the show. So last week, my channel was demonetized. Apparently, they've demonetized both channels, which I was not aware of. And I thought they had demonetized the primary one. They didn't say anything about shutting down my live stream. But apparently, they've done it to both channels. So, oh boy, free speech, if you are conservative and discuss facts and science, they don't like that out there these days. But anyway, Dr. How do I say that again?
You can say
Dr. Shiva, welcome to the show. And why don't we start off by talking about your educational background?
right. I think one way to look at me is I have I'm an MIT PhD. I think there's probably a couple of thousand people only in the world who have an MIT PhD, and I have 4 degrees from MIT. But I've been a scientist and an inventor pretty much most of my life since the age of 14, when, as you mentioned, I created the first email system. But that was just the beginning of my work in science and technology. I went off to MIT, did 4 degrees there during 1981 to 2007. In fact, I used to teach there. And I started 7 different companies across many, many different fields. In fact, the latest company I'm running is worth a couple of $1 billion. It's in the area of biotech, pharmaceuticals, and nutraceuticals. And it's a technology that in many ways, if email was the digital version of the office, the new technology I've created, Cytosolve, is a digital version of the human cell, or for that matter, any type of cell. And we're using that to eliminate the need for animal testing and discover new medicines faster and cheaper. In fact, about several years ago, we discovered a combination therapy for pancreatic cancer, and we got it allowed by the FDA. And probably by the end of this year, we'll probably be filing probably about 20 or 30 different patents in all different kinds of very nonlinear synergistic combinations of medicines, all coming from natural sources.
Would you like to get into the history of your invention of email? And I know that you had a lot of trouble with that, in fact. And I just checked. It says that the backup channel, they did not shut off my live stream, so I'm not sure what's going on there either.
Oh, okay. That's good.
But at least we're recording, so we'll get it out tonight either way.
Well, I think that what's interesting with the invention of email is it's not really the facts, because the facts are obvious who created it. I called it email, was the one to coin the term. I wrote the first 50,000 lines of code to replicate the entire inter-office mail system. Anyone over the age of 40 remembers that the way offices ran was one with the landline phone, and the other one was through what was called a paper-based mail system. which involved the secretary being a node in a network where on her desk, a physical desk, she had a inbox, an outbox, drafts, she had a paper clip, you know, she had a typewriter, she'd write these things called memos. She'd literally make carbon copies using carbon paper. So if she had to do a letter to you and CC 20 people, she'd be typing, you know, at least 19 times. And, you know, they put these memos in it. Let's say I was going to hire you. I would send an email to my superior. I would do an attachment and I would circulate it using the CC field or the forward field to different people, and people would respond back. And that's how communications was done in the interoffice mail environment. So and now remember, in 1978, I was only a 14-year-old kid working in Newark, New Jersey. I was one of those guys who didn't just play soccer and baseball, but I was also pretty hardcore a mathematics guy by the age of 9th. I had finished calculus and I had the opportunity to go to NYU in a special intensive computer science summer program where I learned 7 programming languages and got a full-time job as a research fellow working with people in their 40s, 50s, 60s. And I was treated as a you know, an equal. And this was in Rutgers Medical, what is now known as Rutgers Medical School. And I was asked to convert the entire interoffice mail system into the electronic version. And that's what I did, called it email, went off to MIT. When I got to MIT, the president of MIT said, who was at that time the science advisor to Reagan, said, it's too bad you can't patent software because the Supreme Court wasn't recognizing it, but you should copyright it. According to the Copyright Act, the Computer Software Act of 1980, I did that. And on August 30th, 1982, a young American teenager was given the first US copyright for email, recognizing me legally and officially as the inventor of email. So those are the facts. The issue is, why was there even any controversy?
Right.
And that's probably the more, I mean, you know, I wrote the code, called it email, and have the first copyright. If patents were allowed, I would have been the first to patent and I would have been a gazillionaire. But I made money, you know, went off to MIT and I was on the front page of MIT for many, many other things, created many other inventions. But it was only in September of around 2011, when my dear mom was dying of a horrible disease 35 years later, she had saved all of this content, all the artifacts in a beautiful Samsonite suitcase, and she gave it to me. And Time Magazine science editor, Doug Amick, still to this day, the only journalist who actually went through the materials, wrote a wonderful article called The Man Who Invented Email, sharing the facts. 3 months later, the Smithsonian contacted me and wanted all these materials. It went in on February 16th, 2012, 3 months later, about a couple months later after my mom died. And a young Washington Post reporter who read the facts wrote a great article in the Washington Post that night called Shiva Ayyadurai honored as the inventor of email. And right after that is when the proverbial shit hits the fan, when it should have been an occasion for celebrating the American dream. I mean, what better person? I came from a lower caste Indian family, poor family, grew up in Patterson and Clifton, worked in Newark, and I created the first email system. But instead, what happened was the white liberals, academics, unleashed hell, because during those 35 years, they had redone the fake story, the fake history of email, saying that the military created, when they didn't. They had a guy who looked like a nerd who simply did simple text messaging. That's not email. Email is the entire system. And I never claimed to have invented electronic messaging. That goes back to Samuel Morse. But I invented email. And over a period of 4 years, I was called all sorts of horrible names, a fraud, all those 4 degrees, all my inventions, my Fulbright scholarship didn't matter, because what mattered was this very, very brainwashing narrative, which is all great innovations must come from the military industrial academic complex. And what they didn't know was I'd been an activist most of my life. You know, there's pictures of me fighting at MIT for all sorts of things. If anything, they could even call me a lefty. And so I put on my activist hat, did the research. We found documents predating 1978. 1970 is when I invented email. Clearly written a military analyst report saying that there was no intention ever to create the electronic version of the interoffice mail system because they considered it impossible. In fact, the subtext of that is they considered these young women secretaries, frankly, incapable of using the computer. But what a 14-year-old American kid was trying to do was trying to move these secretaries from the typewriter to the keyboard when the elite academics thought that they were incapable of using the computer. So that's what the facts are. Eventually, 4 years later, I found a great lawyer and we sued Gawker Media, and Hulk Hogan had sued them, had just won a lawsuit, which was an appeal. I was the second guy to sue them for $35 million, and they claimed bankruptcy. The karma and the irony was I was appointed the co-chairman of the bankruptcy committee to sell Gawker to Univision. And recently we settled with another nonsensical blog, which had called me all sorts of names. The facts really are this, or I guess not the facts. The more the underlying issue is, why was there even a controversy? And what does it mean when a dehumanizing narrative has taken place that innovation only can occur in Silicon Valley, great innovations, or places like MIT? The problem that they have is, I earned 4 degrees at MIT. I didn't say that I was a Native American to get in. I actually earned them. And the invention of email took place outside of the military-industrial complex. And that is what the real issue is. By the way, you know who invented a TV? It was a 14-year-old boy working in Franklin, Idaho by the name of Philo Farnsworth. He went through a similar journey. So I think the deeper issue of the invention of email is really, it's not just about me, but it's the story of every person who wants to express being a human being, which is innovation and creativity, period. And the dehumanizing aspect is to say that only after you go to MIT or Silicon Valley can you be a great inventor.
Right. And so they didn't want a dark-skinned kid who's an immigrant from India inventing it and taking their glory.
Well, yeah. So the thing is, they don't, the story with me is a little bit different than Philo Farnsworth. Philo Farnsworth was a white kid in a small farm, and you can't have stuff take place in a 600-person farm. It has to occur by RCA. RCA actually stole us. In my case, you have the race issue, because here's a darkie, and it's being done in Newark, and it's being done outside of the military-industrial complex. So I had 3 strikes against me. But the issue is that you have to fight for this. And we've been victorious on it. Eventually we got close to $1 million settlement from Gawker, but it's really not the money. The bigger issue is, and we're never going to give up this fight, sharing the truth is, in fact, I was invited by one of the governors of Argentina for 10 days, and they were very appreciative of this, because it's really the story of the underdog, and it's the story of the fact that innovation can occur anytime, any place by anybody. And you don't need to go to MIT or to the Silicon Valley elites to be able to say that you're an innovator. I think it's a deeply important American story.
I would agree with you. And what can you say about Wikipedia and their involvement in all of this? Have they tried to cover up the invention of this?
Oh, yeah. I mean, when I give my presentation, in the middle of 2014, 2015, when this controversy was at its peak, a Wikipedia senior editor wrote to me. He goes, I went through your facts and I attempted to change, give you credit. He goes, I was called all sorts of horrible names and essentially said that I was crazy. And if you go to Wikipedia, people have actually gone on there. I mean, you can go look at my site prior to 2012, where I'm in the Inventors, I think, Hall of Fame for American Scientists, and all of that gets removed, and they reduce it to a controversial claim. What's total BS? What do you have to be? You have to be do I have to be a blonde-haired Jewish kid with blue eyes, and then I would be on every stamp in the United States? I went to, I've traversed all sorts of domains. I've been in, when I first came to this country, I lived in Patterson, all African-American, very poor people, Clifton, working class whites. And my last 3 years, I was in Livingston High School, great teachers, very dedicated teachers, but predominantly very wealthy Jewish people. And it was interesting. No one in that school ever told me about MIT. My sister and I were the only 2 Indian kids there. And because the narrative was only Jewish people are the smart people. And I have a lot of Jewish friends, but the narrative is that they're the chosen people and they can only create. And this is a very racist narrative. And so, again, I would assert, was I Jewish? Was I blonde-haired? I would be on every stamp in the world.
Yeah.
And
I
that's
just
what
lost
we
you
need
for a
to look
second.
at is.
Repeat that last sentence.
Yeah. What I'm saying is that those in power have created segregation in very, very diverse forms. To be an inventor, you have to be a certain way. You can't be an athlete, right? You can't look strong. You have to look like a nerd. You have to wear glasses. You have to be sort of unhealthy looking. And then you're branded as an inventor. You see what I'm saying?
Right.
If you want to be an athlete, you must talk like this and blah, blah, blah. You know what I'm saying? And you
Right.
must be sort of dumb, right? Brawn-like, and then you're an athlete. If you want, you see, they've created all sorts of segregation. It's not just about race. So, and only certain people can have the moniker of great inventors or scientists. You know, in the middle of my controversy, which was completely fabricated, Walter Isaacson, he's the one who wrote the book on Steve Jobs, he was asked to write, in the middle of this controversy, out of nowhere, a book on the innovators of the digital revolution. So 2012 is when this controversy gets manufactured. 2014 is the peak of it. And Isaacson writes a book called The Innovators of the Digital Revolution. Now, don't you think email is part of the digital revolution? It's not even mentioned.
Right.
For that matter, it's all white people in there. I have nothing against white people. Most of my friends are white people, okay? But
Yeah.
are we trying to say that no black person, no brown person, no yellow-skinned person has invented anything to support the digital revolution? And that's Walter Isaacson, who is, I think, on the board of the Aspen Institute, your elite white liberal institute. So I would argue the most racist people on the planet are white liberals, period.
I would
And
agree
they're the
with you,
one-
and then what they do is they cast the blame on all of the conservatives as you know, us being the racist ones. But yeah, I would agree with you.
Malcolm X brought this up. Malcolm X said, you know, you have the Southern people who tell you whatever they want to call you, but he goes, it's the Northern wolves, as he called the white liberals.
Right.
And Elizabeth Warren is part of that. Harvard University is part of that. And
Absolutely.
these Northern wolves, who are the real white liberals, think they're the ones who are going to anoint who's an inventor or who's an innovator.
Now,
and the truth and the facts. Yeah, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, well, I just wanted to say, you know, with Wikipedia, I've had my own experience with them. I do a lot of forensic research, and I've investigated the history of the 60s psychedelic counterculture and the so-called inventor of magic mushrooms, or the so-called discoverer of magic mushrooms, a guy by the name of Gordon Wasson, I discovered was running the CIA's MKUltra subproject 58, and the Huxley family was heavily involved in the promotion and engineering for the CIA of the MKUltra program. And we had Wikipedia updated to reflect Gordon Wasson's participation in the CIA's MKUltra subproject 58 program. I had a doctor on my show, a guy by the name of Dr. Colin Ross, and he had given me the lead, and I had gone through and verified all of the citations and pulled all of the original documents from the CIA FOIA requests, and found that indeed Wasson was, MKUltra subproject 58. And then this was all updated on Wikipedia, and then immediately all of this was edited out, and they tried to water it down and change the facts, and and then it had to be, because I'm an independent researcher, then it had to be published under an academic to get official recognition that the work was correct. I don't need an ad veracundium fallacy to know that the research is correct. I can check the citations. I'm a forensic researcher. I know how to look things up and verify it. And I was able to well prove through several, extensive articles that this was the case. But Wikipedia and whomever was in there, as soon as they realized that it had been edited to reflect that Wasson was indeed CIA, they went in there and quickly edited it. You can go in there and see all the edit history of what they've done to play this down, et cetera. And, they still won't allow, information to be published about Aldous Huxley, Julian Huxley's involvement in all of this stuff, and they were the guys creating the blueprint for the entire operation, not warning people against it, like Aldous Huxley's Brave New World is one of the key blueprints of the whole operation. So anyway, and I want to get into cannabis with you later, and that actually flows into some of the research that I've exposed on that. We even did a show on this topic, a couple of months ago.
Yeah, I mean, look, this is why my running for US Senate as an MIT PhD, as a guy who's actually created thousands of jobs. You know, the building I'm in, I have no debt on. It's my building. I bought it in 2002. We run our own data center. So I've run, 7 very successful companies. Massachusetts is supposed to be the center of innovation, right? MIT and Harvard. But we keep electing people, or it's supposed to be a representative democracy. You have people, a guy called Markey or Malarkey, you have Warren. These are the kinds of people that are being elected. So it really comes down to the fact that the electorate, voters in particular, have an opportunity in 2020, particularly in Massachusetts, which I consider the epicenter of, if you believe this thing called the deep state. It's not Washington, D.C., it's Massachusetts. Massachusetts is where all the, sort of the swamp creatures get created and incubated, et cetera. And the great opportunity I've had is, I've experienced extremes. I grew up in India in an environment where we were considered low caste, untouchables, right? Where you won't find a lot of Indians like me. And most of the Indians in the United States are frankly quite racist because they always try to figure out what my last name is, because they themselves are quite segregationist, racist people. And I say this with all, factual reality of what I've experienced, be it India or here. So you have that phenomenon. You have the fact that because I worked hard, because I probably had certain very good genetics that came from both my parents, who were very hardworking people, I busted my balls, and I, won every award in high school, was also a great athlete, and also made it to MIT. And so, and beyond that, I was able to, have the opportunity only in this country to create jobs and start companies, and I continue doing that. So what better person to represent Massachusetts than me? And when we ran last year against Warren, we ran initially as Republicans. The Republicans were so afraid of me, they ran an idiot, we call him Dirty Deal, who actually photoshopped a picture with Trump. And when Trump doesn't like this guy. So the rhinos ran a fake Trumper. And there was Warren, a fake Indian and a fake Trumper. And we ran as independents. We got close to 100,000 votes, 5 times more than any independent Senate candidate has ever gotten, raising, and I think we spent less than 70 cents a vote. Warren was spending about 20 to 30 bucks a vote, and the Republican, $5. So, and we did some quite incredible things on the innovation side in running a campaign. So this time I'm going to run as a Republican, and they don't have this rule that they had last year. So they're not going to be able to keep me out unless, obviously, if they try to change the rules. So it's a big opportunity, I think, not only for Massachusetts, but for this country, to have someone like me, who's an absolute embodiment of the American dream, represent them. And the good news is that, I'm articulate, I know what I'm talking about, but more importantly, I've seen both sides. I've been in the bowels of academia. I've been in Hollywood. I just finished I know, that entire environment. And when you look at celebrity culture and you look at academic culture, they're not that different. You're looking at highly insecure people with very little talent, most of them. And by the way, I distinguish that between real scientists and real artists or real actors, a very different group of people. The academic is essentially a salesperson. He's not that intelligent, not that smart. They're essentially ready to do whatever, they're prostitutes for whatever grant is available. And same with celebrities, same type of culture. And the reason I think when Alan spoke to you, we wanted to call this a climate of science, is that I have a very, very deep insight into where the country, for that matter, the world is going if science degenerates to where it's headed. Because the fake news behind the fake news is really fake science. Because the journalist today essentially,
sorry, go ahead.
The journalists essentially cut and copy citation. So the way it goes is a quote unquote of an academic can write a paper. The fake news guys cut and paste that, and then it becomes fossilized on Wikipedia, because Wikipedia has nothing to do with truth. Wikipedia is citations. So I could write an article on some journal somewhere saying, you beat your dog. And then I could go to your Wikipedia page and say, yeah, he beats his dog, and cite that article. So we have a flow of information now. Ultimately, the issue is that all of these people cite an academic. So John Kennedy gave a very, very interesting talk in the 1960s to the National Academy of Sciences. And he said, we have a problem in a free society because the problems of the world have become very sophisticated. And we today rely on you, and he was speaking to these scientists, and we're assuming that you're disinterested and you're objective and you are there for the public service. Well, the fact is that the real scientists have been filtered out starting around probably the 60s, 70s. And what you have is you have a bunch of lemmings called academics. They get rid of the real smart guys, the people who want to raise hell, because a scientist is ultimately a revolutionary, because science is always pushing the edges. Rarely do you have great science coming from people who support the status quo. So they've gotten rid of all those people, primarily.
That's exactly what I've seen in my own research. And, you know, what you see is this pattern with these very often tenured professors, where when you find 3 or 4 of them citing each other rather than citing the primary citations, this is when you know you've hit on an academic fraud. And then you dig down into the primary citations there, and you realize that there's nothing there to substantiate the claims, or in fact, the primaries show the exact opposite of what they are claiming. And I've found this, you know, time and time again. And I've written about academic cells and whatnot. And in my own opinion, you know, probably most tenured professors are on the take to mislead people. And clearly, the peer review system is nonsense. It's not there to get you know, for approval of valid research. It's truth by consensus, and these people are there to keep out any dissenting opinions so that the status quo is maintained. And then you see issues with the scientific method itself. And about 9 months ago, we did an episode destroying the scientific method and calling to bring in the rational scientific method, totally overhauling the scientific method because of all of this. But, you know, most people don't realize that when, you know, most people are used to citing second and third hand sources, and that's the limit of their intellect. They don't ever think, hey, you know, I can go and fact check the primaries on this research. I can go dig up 15th, 16th century documents or whatever the case may be on whatever the topic, verify things and find out the truth of this. And I can question these professors. And so what I discovered over and over again was in just about any field I looked into, I could find these circle jerks of academics, as you call them, citing each other and not the primaries. And that was, as soon as I saw that, that signaled where I should dig further to be able to prove or to reveal or expose their fraud.
Yeah, I mean, when you look, if you go to the thing with the scientific method, since, you know, by the way, I think we may have mentioned, but I have a book coming out called The Climate of Science. And I go through this in detail. But the scientific method is there's two, by the way, when people discuss the scientific method, they only discuss one part of it. But the scientific method in its purity should go like this. You have an observation, right? You see apple falling from a tree. There's two parts here. One is you keep seeing the apple fall from the tree, right? And that's called a recurrent pattern. And from observing that recurrent pattern, you then come up with a model, right? So you can say, well, the apple falls to the earth, and the force between the apple and the earth, you say the pattern is, some gravitational constant, G, times the mass of the apple times the mass of the earth divided by, let's say, R to the power of 3, okay? Which we know is not right. And then you do
or is it pressure, and that's a whole other issue altogether.
Right, but pressure is force per unit area. But you do that, and then you come up with a model that's starting to match this recurrent pattern, and maybe you tweak it to G, times M1 times M2 over R squared, which is, by the way, a Newton's law, right, of gravitation. So that becomes a law then. But even when you have a law, you're supposed to keep testing. But there's another part of the scientific method which is left out of the discourse, or even in AP, physics, they talk about it, but they don't really emphasize, which is from that observation, not only do you build an understanding of a model and a law, but you also are supposed to do something else, which is come up with an explanation. So the law is the what is occurring. but the explanation is why it's occurring. That explanation, also called a hypothesis, may lead to a theory, like the theory of relativity, right? Which explains gravity or attempts to explain gravity. So you have a law which comes out, which is one part of the scientific method, and you also have a theory, the why. And it's not just a theory. The theory in many ways is much more stronger because it actually explains the underlying of the law. So there's really two aspects of the scientific method. But the key thing is, Einstein said, it's not how many experiments prove my theory, but all I need is one experiment that could blow away my theory. But the nature of the scientific method was there was supposed to be constant experimentation, constant skepticism, constant discourse, constant, free speech. That was the underlying basis of the scientific method. It was never supposed to be based on something called scientific consensus, which is total BS. It doesn't matter if 99% of the people believe the earth goes around the sun. All you need is one person clearly demonstrating that the sun goes around the earth, but all you need is one person demonstrating the earth goes around the sun. So what's great about when the scientific method actually works, it has nothing to do with democracy. It has to do with something beyond politics. And so when you look at the climate of science right now, it's not only with climate change, which we can talk about, but you look at every major issue. In the book, we go through 17 different issues, from climate change to healthcare, to the economy, to cannabis, to immigration. And we show how on each one of these issues, the establishment tries to break people up into left and right, which means you must be a lefty if you're against Monsanto. You must be a righty if you're against the climate change doctrine. You must be a lefty if you're pro-cannabis. You must be a righty if you're, et cetera. And when I went through these issues and actually applied engineering and science as a guy who's got 4 degrees from MIT, and I want to emphasize that because engineering, what's powerful about engineering is you can't BS people. You build a piece of software. If it doesn't work, you can't talk your way out of it. You're going to lose customers. You build an airplane, it doesn't work, you can't BS people. But academics can draw some curves and BS people. But what's powerful about engineering, or what's powerful about what a plumber does or an electrician does or a nurse does, is they're always having to work with nature's laws. So what's happened with climate change, for example, is if you follow the scientific method, it doesn't make any sense at all. None of the models match reality. In fact, the basis of science is a model, if it mimics reality, should always have a consistent prediction. So if the apple falls from the tree, right? And let's say one model said the apple would be suspended in the air 2 feet, and another one says at 5 feet, another one says 10, and the other one says, it'll hit the ground. That's called indeterminate. But when you look at the climate change nonsense, or the climate change models, you have, for the case of, for example, ice melting from the Arctic, there's 40 different models. One says no ice will melt, another says 100% will melt, and there's various flavors of it. That's not science, it's called indeterminate. And same with the 120 models that they have for the prediction of how CO2 will affect temperature. Again, 120 different models. So we're dealing in a situation right now where the people who are climate scientists, which by the way is a bogus field, there's no field called climate science, it's completely created. The fundamental area of climate is fluid mechanics. 2 turbulent fluids, the ocean and the atmosphere interacting together to use convection to dissipate the excess heat. Now, first of all, that's one of the most difficult things to model because we don't even have a solution for the Navier-Stokes equation for a turbulent fluid. And you're talking about 2 turbulent fluids. So the whole thing has been completely manufactured. Why? In order to make people like Al Gore extremely wealthy off carbon tax. So on the one hand, you have the American worker over here. Over the last 20 years, his wages have dropped. You have the academic and the administrator at a university, their incomes have gone up by 3 times. And these people are proliferating all sorts of narratives because they get funded, they get paid, which ultimately extracts a pound of flesh from the American worker. That's what's going on, is the ultimate of exploitation. And it all emanates out of this 1 mile radius I'm at here at between MIT and Harvard. So you go to the next issue, cannabis, right? My sister, was a pothead all her life, destroyed our family. Now she claims she's one of the big pot doctors, promoting how cannabis can solve everything. Right. Well, the reality is that cannabis of today is nothing like the cannabis that, Lord Shiva smoked again in the Hindu Kush mountains, okay? That was 1-to-1 THC to CBDs. We're talking about 80-to-1 THC to CBD levels. We're talking about 25% THC. The joint today is a delivery engine for THC, just like the cigarette was a delivery engine for nicotine. Prior to the 1800s, very few people died of tobacco. They started mixing both tobaccos. They started layering in things like coumadin as a delivery engine. That's what modern the joint is. And you molest the plant, you basically are destroying the plant. It's only the female plant that they extract, keep all the, you go through what is being done is a complete adulteration of nature. And it gets even more interesting. All these, idiots like Ocasio-Cortez and Malarkey, who's Ed Markey, who's our associate, who we're running against here. These people are saying that they want to support a thing called the New Green Deal. By the way, Ocasio-Cortez's senior advisor, was the head of the biggest cannabis lobby. If you go to Washington State right now, the amount of cannabis that they're growing there will require an entire another Grand Coulee Dam. Let me tell you why. They're growing cannabis not in the wild. It is grown in these hermetically sealed, greenhouses. 1 gram of cannabis requires 2.08 kilowatt hours, 100 times more than 1 gram of aluminum to manufacture. So this is what the reality is. An idiot wearing a new Green Deal T-shirt or Green New Deal T-shirt, smoking his joint, and behind him is going to be a bunch of pollution plants, because you don't have enough energy even to power the production of cannabis from solar or whatever, wind. So the whole goal here is to lower pollution. That's never discussed in this. The
Absolutely.
Paris Accords allow China to dump another 11 billion more carbon metric tons. They already were at 11 billion. They get to go to 22 billion by 2030. And what that means is more lead, more sulfur dioxide. CO2 is not a pollutant. You have to be an idiot to think CO2 is a pollutant.
Absolutely.
In fact, we're at the lowest CO2 levels ever in the history of the Earth until 300 million years ago. So the reality is we all want to lower pollution. In fact, that's not discussed. In fact, you have the most insidious companies like Monsanto supporting the climate change doctrine. Why? Because they want to push out more of their pesticides, more of their genetically engineered foods. And
absolutely.
So that's what the book really shows, that the real enemy of the people, like was the enemy of the people in ancient India or modern India, was the upper caste people who thought they were better than the rest of what we call Sudras, like the N-word. And in America today, you have the elite academics who are telling everyone else how they want to help minorities, how they want to help the poor, when they are the royalty of the modern world. And they need to be dethroned. And what better place to do it than Massachusetts? Because they are the enemy of the people ultimately. There's $2 billion in climate change grants. You could be a moronic, stupid professor, write anything saying climate change causes bed bugs and you'll get funded. That's what this is about. And so they have made academics prostitutes. They will write anything to promote a doctrine, which is really about extracting more taxes. And it's an insurance against us. That's what it really is. And when you unravel it, yeah.
Well, I wanted to mention or disclose, actually, that from about the age of 20 onward for a number of years, I was the Inland Empire coordinator for the California Hemp Initiative. I worked on Prop 215 to legalize medical marijuana. And, once it was legalized, I looked back and looked at what they were doing and the wax hits and the this and that and the vapes and all of this stuff. And I was shocked. That's not what we fought for. Industrial hemp was supposed to make the world greener and better and yada, yada. But,
Right.
looking back, I've come out against most of the cannabis and hemp movement, except for, maybe use as clothing and whatnot. But yeah, you're exactly right on the levels of pollution that it causes and all of this stuff. But
THC, you have to understand, our bodies for 500 million years, even in invertebrates, have the endocannabinoid system. What is that? That is a system where our body generates at least 2 that we've identified endocannabinoids. You don't need weed for this. So
right.
Our body has the right level of fats. When you relax and you live in a secure environment, your body actually makes endocannabinoids.
Well, and they got everybody on a low-fat diet now too. That's screwing everybody up too.
Right, the 1-to-1 omega-3s, omega-6s, when it's 1-to-1, your body creates endocannabinoids. And by the way, I'm saying a lot of this with a deep understanding of, we've gone through around 10,000 pieces of literature. We've mined the molecular pathways with this new technology. We've actually have understood at the molecular systems level that the THC affects the CB1 receptor, and we can conclusively show, we're going to be publishing some papers on this, we can conclusively show the mechanistic reason how high dosage of THC, either for the acute person who takes a lot of it, or the chronic person who's smoking it over long periods of time, how it essentially can lead to psychosis and schizophrenia. Now, will it affect everyone? No, just like there are some people who smoke cigarettes all day, live until 120, right? But if you are a young kid and you come from a family who has a history of psychosis and schizophrenia, it is disastrous for you to even smoke the stuff, period. If you are a young person and neurogenesis is taking place until you're 25 years old, which means your brain is still growing, it's again stupid. Parents are idiotic to let their kids smoke it because you're basically destroying the brain. Now, those people who think they're okay, the more and more data, the amount of emergency room visits is doubling every 3 years from cannabis-induced psychosis. And this is not just this is not just conspiracy. That's what's actually going on. Marlboro just put in $2.1 billion last year into the cannabis industry. Why? Because they're losing sales in nicotine. So they're going to move to another industry. And you have to understand, just like alcohol and liquor, you only need 15% of heavy users to make a very, very substantive, profitable industry. So alcohol, all you need is 15% of people doing 8 drinks more than a day, which is what they have, and you're a very profitable industry. The goal of the cannabis model right now is to identify those 15% of heavy users, which I already have, by the way, and sell the hell out to them and get them hooked when they're in early age. It's tobacco version 2.0.
Yeah, and you see it being promoted all over California now with big freeway billboards and this kind of stuff promoting get your weed here and there, and you can buy this stuff just about anywhere now.
Yeah, the issue is it's not, here's my solution to both of the issues we've talked about. Let's go to academia. And if you want, I have very clear, definitive solutions, and they're very practical solutions. If you go to academia, number one, we need to eliminate tenure. In any federally funded institute, no more tenure. You can't have a job for life, get out and work, go teach, go build something. And we should bring industry people into academia because they actually know stuff. The second thing is any federally funded institution, which is getting federal dollars, at any level like this, all their research from the time you get the dollars should be open sourced, which means the data. See, what happens is a young professor comes in, he wants to get tenure. He's got 7 years to get his tenure. He gets a government grant. He doesn't give all of his data away. That's where the manipulation takes place. If you do an experiment, you got to put that data up in the cloud. I should be able to do it. Citizen science, you should. Citizen science. There are a lot of smart people. They're not just at MIT and Harvard and Yale. There's a lot of people in their basements who actually have good skills and they can do stuff. So all the data should be published. Go try to find any of the climate change satellite data. You can't even get it. It's very difficult. I should be able to download the data and run my own analysis on it, write my own publications. Third issue is no more peer review. Einstein did not publish one paper under peer review of his 300 papers. Of his last paper that he submitted to, I think, the physical review, they said, physical letters or something, we want to do peer review. He goes, give me my paper back. What are you talking about? He goes, anything new, why should it be peer reviewed? Because your peers are the first ones to attack it and put down innovation. So anything that's federally funded should be published. Let the entire public decide and let it be refuted openly. So what we've created, so if we do just those 3 things, it's going to be a big necessary stab in the heart of academic monopoly. That's the first thing we should do. When it comes to something like, cannabis, my view is it should be decriminalized. You shouldn't be throwing people in jail. You want to do anything in your own home, go kill yourself, do whatever the hell you want. I don't care. But when you want to live in this society and interact with other people, not knowing that you're getting 25% THC and that it's going to affect you and it's going to affect others, it's absolute reckless behavior. So I don't think it should be legalized. In fact, legalization has actually led to a massive black market. The prices have gone further down, and it's created more accessibility to everyone.
Well, and I think cannabis causes.
Getting it.
I think cannabis causes half the problems they claim it eliminates as well.
Oh, yeah, it's totally bullshit. Yeah, my sister's out there telling people it's an exit drug. It's nonsense.
Yeah.
And when you actually look at the data, 90% of the people on heroin and other opiates all, smoke cannabis at some point or had cannabis. And what's fascinating is when you start talking to these young millennials and telling this, I had a volunteer we got rid of, he was telling me, oh, well, it's my opinion. I don't agree. I said, what the fuck are you talking about? If I can use that language, your opinion doesn't matter. Science doesn't give a damn about your opinion or your beliefs. Science is based on actual reality. And you're talking to a person who's never studied chemistry, who doesn't understand what a kinetic equation is, doesn't understand what a receptor is. So that's a level of degeneration that's taken place. We have people who know nothing about science telling how their opinions matter. Opinions don't matter. What matters is let's support the real scientific method, and let's find out what's going on. If we don't know stuff, we should have the courage to say, hey, we don't know. There's uncertainty. So we haven't done that. Instead, you have politicians and celebrities and academics, this triumvirate coming together to push agendas, either for their own popularity or to manipulate the average everyday worker who's busting his balls to put money on the table for their family. Those are the people who are getting manipulated by fake science. So, I've talked about climate change. By the way, climate does change. CO2 is a greenhouse gas. Greenhouse gases do cause the temperature to change, and humans put out greenhouse gas. That's not the issue. The issue is how much. That is the purpose of science.
Well, and CO2, it's all, CO2 or carbon is also the foundation of all life as well.
Yeah, and we have the lowest levels of CO2 in the history of the planet until 300 million years ago. We're at a CO2 famine. Look, I was at Andover, Massachusetts, a very elite neighborhood. They had a library talk with some professor at BU who runs a center on sustainability. By the way, inclusivity, sustainability, and diversity, you can get money for it all day long, right? While you're actually probably the most racist people and probably the most anti, nature people promoting pollution. That's what's fascinating. But here's this professor standing.
Well, the Toyota Prius is a perfect example. Sorry about that. I was just saying the Toyota Prius is the perfect example. You have all the battery systems and electronics and everything. And these people, that drive the Prius, they always have, 90% of the time they have a huge traffic jam behind them because they're so aloof and inconsiderate of everybody else on the road, and they're eating their tofu burgers and wearing their Birkenstocks and causing more pollution than they're solving because of this, and I don't know if just on a side note, I don't know if you're aware of abiogenic oil, but it's there's a whole scandal around petroleum as well.
Mm-hmm. Look, if we want to be serious about solving things, we have to respect engineering. One thing about engineering, everything around us, this communication that we're doing right now, the iPhone, all of this stuff came from people's names we don't even know who busted their balls doing day-to-day tasks to create things. Engineers are ultimately the people who have the opportunity to advance life. If we want to be serious about, lowering pollution, we should be treating fusion, not fission, but fusion like the Manhattan Project, because we have enormous amounts of seawater, and that's what we should be focused on. Not like building windmills, not like building solar cells, because these things cannot, in the 21st, 22nd century, meet any of the energy demands we need. We should be looking at materials like hemp, right? Real hemp, because the graphene can be extracted from hemp, is stronger than steel. But we're focused on, you have this whole plant, we're taking one little piece of it, which is to destroy the youth of this country, and we're not focused on the entire plant. The plant, has many, many powerful uses for creating, whole different types of biocomposites, but we don't do that, right? We focus on the most degenerate aspect of the plant. We molest the plant for human molestation and degeneration. I mean, I'll give you another example, gun violence, right? I'm a systems guy. I've been trained in an engineering systems approach to anything. How many people die of gun violence, do you know, in the United States every year?
Oh, I looked it up last year, but it's not very much, when you put it in.
40,000.
Okay.
40,000.
And a lot of those are in self-defense as well. And what is
right,
it?
so,
for every crime, 8 crimes are stopped by guns as well.
Right, so that's not included in that equation, but let's even give it to them, to the mainstream media, 40,000 people. How many people die of sepsis, which is where you get a bacterial infection in your body and you die? 40,000 people, okay? cause typically in hospitals, et cetera. So you have 40,000 people die of sepsis, 40,000 people die of gun violence. How much research is funded for sepsis?
Very little.
No, 100 times more than gun violence research.
Oh, it is.
Yeah. And there's about 120,000 papers written on PubMed. So, we understand how sepsis works, blah, 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 blah. How much research have we funded in gun violence? Well, a fraction of that, a 100th of that. You know how many papers, if you type in gun violence on PubMed, by the way, PubMed is a site for all scientific literature,
Sure.
You'll find about 400 papers. 400 papers versus 120,000 papers for a phenomenon that causes the same amounts of death. Now, among those 400 papers, which by the way I've gone through, there was one great paper, one of the few that was a systems approach saying, let's really look at this problem holistically, done by a woman, a multifactorial problem. And what she discovered was that there are 5 issues that cause these rampages, 5. One of them being bullying, one of them being, something's wrong with the kid, but people ignore it. Another one of them being drugs, one of them being, violence. And the 5th one being access to weapons. And her research showed that if you just eliminate any one of them, not all of them, just one of them, you can stop these rampages. But we choose to take that, we choose only to say no more Second Amendment, right? Instead of saying, oh, what about good family structure? Why don't we impose that? What about, trying to ensure that you see a kid who's a little bit off, the teachers get involved and they try to address it? What about putting in, eliminating these psychotropic drugs? But we focus on one of those 5, knowing that any one of the other 4 from this research can eliminate it, right?
Right,
So
and Prozac, et cetera, is a huge problem with these mass shootings, et cetera.
Because right when you come off of it, you get so. And again, who supports this? Harvard School of Public Health. Okay, the academics get paid to create whatever narrative, and they are the elite academics. So the same academics, Dick Lindzen, who I've recently come to know, great guy, scientist at MIT. In fact, not only was the scientist, he was the head of the department for 20 years, the meteorology department. I had done a video 3-4 years ago exposing the Paris Accords. It's a very popular video if people want to punch it in. But Dick had, Professor Lindzen had written to Trump saying, get out of the Paris Accords. Very, very serious physicist, serious, a fluids guy. And the other 120 professors wrote to Trump denouncing him. Well, I asked Dick, what's going on? He goes, Shiva, MIT gets $20 to $40 million in government grants. That's what's really going on, okay? What's really going on is climate change is big business for academia, big business. And then you have idiots like Schumer trying to pass a bill in Congress, Bill 792, which is telling people, which is trying to pass a bill which says no more discussion can be fostered by any government institution on climate change because of the scientific consensus. That is no different than the Council of Trent that took place, which were the edicts that, attacked Galileo. So you take issue after issue after issue. The real enemies of the people are the academics. And that's who we need to go after, because we throw Wall Street guys in jail, but have you ever seen an academic thrown in jail for writing a false paper? Why isn't that guy Jonathan Gruber, who called people stupid, who was the architect of Obamacare, not in jail? He knew it was all nonsense.
Right.
So,
well, it's like that study. It was a false study that came out a couple of years ago, or last year, 2 years ago. These guys intentionally published a false study on dog rape, and it got published in all of these snowflake publications, for feminism and yada, yada, yada. And then they revealed that the whole thing was a fraud. And of course, they were testing to see if these snowflake journals would publish this nonsense paper. And of course, they all published it without issue. And then, these guys get sued for exposing how these journals were complete frauds.
Yeah, and what's interesting is there are Randy Schekman, who won the Nobel Prize in Medicine. I think shortly after he won the Nobel Prize, he wrote a scathing article saying, he said, look, I've been part of this system, so he profited from it. But he said, all of these journals are in cahoots, and it's all about citations. For those of you who don't know how this works in academia, if you get your PhD and you want to become a professor, the way it works is you have 7 years. So if you're, let's say you get your PhD around you're 30 years old or whatever, you have 7 years by the age of 37 to get tenure. What tenure means is you have a job for life. You can never be fired. You get the best healthcare, better healthcare than any of us ever dream of, best investment, plans, etc. So during those 7 years, these guys are trying to get tenure. Well, how do you get tenure? The way you get tenure is that you have to publish papers where you are seen as an expert in a specialized field. So if you say, I want to become the expert in aardvark, the history of aardvarks, okay? Well, you have to publish a series of papers, but your papers, even if you publish 1,000 papers, doesn't mean you're guaranteed tenure. You have to make sure other experts in the aardvark field reference your papers. It's called a citation. Okay, so how do you get a citation? Well, that means you have to go to the 5 other experts and suck ass to them.
Yep.
Literally, because if you don't suck up to them, they're not going to cite you, and you better cite them. So if you're a small, if you're a really innovative scientist, I don't want to use the word academic, scientist, and you actually find some amazing theories of aardvark which blow everyone else's theories, and you try to publish that, and you don't reference the other guys, so it's counter, you're never going to get published, you're never going to get tenure. So the entire system is called a suck-ass model, sucking up model of getting your tenure. So the entire thing is incestuous. It's circular citations, by and large. Once in a while something gets through. But this is why we haven't had any significant innovation coming out of science. We haven't solved any major disease.
Are you aware of who created the current university model?
No, I'm not. Who did it?
Thomas Henry Huxley. Whenever you see a scandal like this, if you track it down, you'll almost always find a member of the Huxley family behind it. Even though, I know you're a Fulbright scholar, even Leonard Holden Huxley was behind the Fulbright thing. But, it's like the Royal Society.
Well, what you find out with Fulbright, he's an interesting guy. He's sort of, Eisenhower, first talked about the world military-industrial complex. William Fulbright was the first one to use the word military-industrial academic complex at at a college talk that he gave. And, he wrote pretty scathingly about it. So once in a while you get guys like this on the left or the right, who actually tell some truth. But I think where we're at in history right now is that 2020 is going to be an important election because it's really about science versus malarkey. That's what it's really going to come to. It's going to be, do you want to believe in science and engineering? And what I mean by science in the broader sense is people who are actually committed to finding truth. The plumber and the electrician, they have to do the right things. Working people can never get away with BSing, right? Because they're never going to get paid. But the people who BS people are the academics, the politicians, the celebrities. Those people they get way too much respect. And that cycle of malarkey, and by the way, the guy that I'm running against, his name is Ed Markey, get that? So it's going to be, the scientist versus malarkey. And it's ultimately going to come down to the fact that, do we want to stand up for the American worker, truly stand up for the American worker, or do we want to support a bunch of leeches? Because these leeches are surviving, their salaries are growing while the American worker salaries are dropping because they create false narratives on immigration, on healthcare, right? The whole healthcare model. I mean, you go into the entire foundation of it. It never talks about lowering cost. They've created an insurance model where there's a collusion between pharmaceutical companies, and insurance companies and the big hospitals. They want to keep costs high. It's like a 50-cent hamburger, a friend of mine said, is selling for $500,000. You go to the emergency room in a hospital, you get a 50 cents aspirin, the actual billing is around $50. That's what's going on. Because there are middlemen called GPOs, group purchasing organizations, and PBMs who make close to $500 billion by elevating these prices. But none of this is ever talked about.
Right.
So the real issue of our campaign is really to hit hard. We got great experience from running the last one. So anyone who's a real Trumper, who really loves this country, should support our campaign in whatever way they want, because we always have a lot of fun, by the way, on our campaign. The last one, if you remember, was only the real Indian can defeat the fake Indian. This one is really about science versus malarkey. Someone said we should say only the darky can beat Markey, but try to be a little more statesmanlike.
Well, they constantly run off of stuff like that, and meanwhile, you have terrible people that get in office like Omar or AOC, et cetera, that don't belong there and are clearly pushing socialist agendas and undermining the country. What do you think about socialism?
Well, look, I'm a student. I've actually, have you read the Communist Manifesto? Have you read
I
Das
have a copy of it,
Kapital?
and I haven't.
Have you read it?
I haven't read it. I haven't sat down and read it, but I do have a
So
copy of it.
I've actually read. So first of all, look, these people are even what I call even fake socialists in many ways. If you really, really read the works of Marx, the first chapter of Das Kapital, basically, what Marx says is, look, each human being has a dream. And there are people come to disintermediate that dream. And that's sort of the thesis. It's an interesting humanist model. But in Das Kapital, Marx defines proletarians. Proletarians are working people. Let me define working people, which means they sell their labor. They actually get up in the morning, they go work. He defined another term called lumpen proletarians.
Yeah, I lost you there for a
big
second.
distaste for. These were criminals. The second I said Marx defined proletarians. Did you hear that?
Yep.
The other definition Marx had was a different degenerate group of human beings that he called lumpen proletarians. The lumpen proletarians were people, or they're lumpen proletariat, people who didn't work, lived off the state, were basically scumbags, okay? Welfare recipients. He never defined them as proletariats, okay? Lenin, in his speeches, he would quote Thessalonians, which said, "Those who do not work should not be fed." All right. So when you really look at, I don't know if you remember this guy Steve Bannon. People ask him, "What are you?" He said, "I'm a Leninist." Real Leninism was standing up. If Lenin were alive today, he'd be supporting Donald Trump. Same with Marx. These people aren't even socialists. They're freaking fake socialists. They are demeaning the concept of work. They want people unwilling to work to get paid. They want to elevate those on welfare. So
well, it's like, who's this Asian guy running for president? And he's
a complete moron. He's a complete moron.
Yeah.
Okay. This guy's a complete.
And then you got Rogan and Jordan Peterson and all of these clowns promoting him.
I mean, I'll talk about.
Did you?
Yeah, because
you cut out again.
Joe Rogan is part. I said Joe Rogan is ultimately part of the establishment.
Absolutely.
Okay? Joe Rogan is the ultimate part of what I call the not so obvious establishment. We can come back to that, but that's what Rogan is. He's represented by the #1 talent agency in the world. And so what you have to understand is that the establishment knows a trend, and they immediately put someone fake like Joe Rogan to take advantage of that trend. That's what Rogan's all about. But when you go to the fundamental issues here, you asked about socialism. Real socialism is about working people, which means the person who gets up, the real scientist, the nurse, the plumber, the electrician, people actually contribute value, them controlling the means of production. Marx was against the distribution of money. He would be against UBI. The goal was working people, we should be controlling government and we should be owning the means of production. That's true socialism. So if you ask me, I support that, man. That's working people. Those are the people who came to vote for Trump, right? The people who voted for Trump were everyday working people who wanted to have power over their lives. They weren't these fake socialists. So these people don't even, Marx would be rolling in his grave right now. But the problem is we in America don't teach history anymore. You have the right and the left. The right wing doesn't really understand what socialism is. So they get caught in this idiotic dialectic. But the reality is, working people who actually sweat, people who work, people who risk, an entrepreneur, those people should have their say in government, not people who are unwilling to work, not people who want to take advantage of this great country. And if you say that, and they're presenting that as socialism,
right?
But ultimately, it's basically keeping people in bondage. That's what it's about. These people,
well, and just like the promotion of cannabis and hypersexuality and all of this other stuff, it's to keep people in bondage. It's Huxley's.
Yeah, well, look, the guy who's running for the Chinese guy. Look, the Chinese culture is all about hardworking, right? You're not supposed to get free stuff. So this is a very clever way of trying to give people free stuff to get votes. It's like it's the ultimate of buying votes. It's the most scumbag thing anyone can do.
So are you a white racist nationalist since you support Trump? Look,
Donald Trump. Look,
I'm just being snarky,
No. In fact, I was called that because I spoke at the Boston Free Speech rally. I was called white supremacist. Nazi. Donald Trump has disrupted the system. Many years ago, look, one of my friends and mentors is Noam Chomsky, people call a lefty. Okay, Noam and I were speaking in 2007, 2009 when I got back from India, and we were predicting someone like Trump would come because the elites on the West Coast and the East Coast were not paying any attention to the American worker. And that's what Donald Trump did. He messaged to that worker because these people were thinking the 1%, 2% of people are transgender and gay and their rights, whatever. I mean, it's like a small percentage of people. Their rights mattered more than people who did not have jobs, did not have health care. They were elevating issues which weren't concerned to the broad mass of people. And that's what Donald Trump did. And he disrupted the establishment because the establishment exists left and right to distract people from fundamental issues. And the fundamental issue is that working people should be have the opportunity to govern themselves. Working people, meaning those people actually work, sell their labor. And what we've created in this country are two sets of people, one set of a bunch of scumbags who move money around all day, and another set of scumbags who don't work. And in between them are people of the middle class who actually work for a living and who have skills.
Said.
And instead of elevating them and providing them infrastructure, we've created a very, very unfortunate system where in the United States right now, you have three economies moving at light force away from each other. You have 30% of the economy which does not work for a living. In a country where there's so many freaking opportunities, so many opportunities. Everyone should be off their butts working. You have another 30% of people who are Uber drivers and doing freelance stuff, the gig economy. And you have another 30% of people actually get up and go to work. And those three economies are moving away at light speed away from each other. That's not a good situation because that's basically a perfect environment for creating a destructive environment. I mean, look, people who come to this country from elsewhere know what the value of this country is. If 30% of people are not working, you have to give them money to take care of them, something is absolutely wrong. You're an absolute, person of at minimum low integrity for telling people I'm going to give you stuff. No, tell people to get off their butt and go work, suffer, work. What's wrong with suffering? It's a good thing. We made it out of the jungle.
Millennials need. I was just going to say, sorry, go ahead. Sorry.
If people go to Africa, and everyone should, and you go into the jungles there, you see monkeys, and you realize, Jesus Christ, I was out there with some of them, scratching myself, living like an animal. But human beings made it out of that. Look at all the stuff we've created. And to deny people that opportunity to create stuff and innovate and create and work hard and give them stuff that as though that's going to help them. No, we move forward through struggle. That's why immigrants do so well when they come to this country. Because when I went to India, I saw, my aunt living in a little hut. So I knew I had a great duty to be here. I should work hard. So if all these people don't want to work hard, why don't we do an immigrant exchange program? Here's my solution for immigration. All those quote unquote illegal immigrants, okay? Some of them actually work hard, right? Why don't we tell them you get citizenship and the guy who wants to sit on his ass not doing anything, send him out to Guatemala or those other countries? Because clearly you've lost your right for citizenship because you think you can leech off this country. Because some of those illegal immigrants actually do work. I'm not talking about the people who are murderers and et cetera, right? Those guys should be shipped back. But people have to value how much enormous resource this country has. We have a $22 trillion GDP, double that of China, 7 times that of India. The resources this country has is quite immense. And anyone who has arrogance, like some of the millennials who don't want to work, some of these people who are willing on welfare, they should just leave this country. I hate to say that, because you do not value what this country offers. There are a lot of poor people throughout this world who have nothing, and they would love to come here.
Right. And what the millennials will do is they will say, well, they will blame the United States for why people want to come to the United States to make a better life on top of it. So they'll say, oh, well, it's because of, they'll cite some malarkey like John Perkins, Confessions of an Economic Hitman.
These people are living in theory. It's all sort of talk.
Right.
It has nothing to do with reality of actually making something. I mean, most of these people are getting degrees in international law like AOC or some nonsensical degree, I just got back from Argentina. Quite interesting. 30 universities, engineering schools, free. Now, why did they create them? They created them at a time for the working folks who were, working all day, and they wanted to get educated so they could go at night to get degrees. And these people are in the, I went to Tucumán in Argentina, which is one of the poorest provinces, and they invited me to come to talk about innovation, et cetera. I was honored there to go. The governor invited me. These people want to just learn, man. They're so incredibly fortunate. They all work and then they go to school at night. So those people value what we have here. So people better get off their ass and stop being crybabies and start valuing what they have here, because they have no idea of the immense resources that they're given access to. And anything can go up, can also come down. When I first came to this country, I used to paint. I learned how to paint from a Yugoslavian immigrant painter. And I used to do landscaping. And he said, in America, you can go as high as you want and you can go as low as you want. And these people want to pull everyone down really low to the lowest level of human excellence, or to no excellence. So
Absolutely. Well said.
It's disgusting. It's disgusting. All of these people should go to my village in India and see how people suffer and they live. And they will realize why they should get off their butt and work hard and stop crying.
Well, and what they cry for is, safe zones in universities and, free handouts.
But meanwhile, many of those people live, luxurious lives like Elizabeth Warren, making $350,000, living in her $5 million mansion and talking about caring for people when she's never invented anything in her life, except invent the fact that she's an Indian, right? That's what these people are about. They're fake. And we have to stop giving these people respect. They should be, wherever they go, people should expose them, attack them. The good news is this. This is the great news is that the American worker who gets up every day and has to work has common sense. Those are the 50% who voted for Trump, and those are the 50% who are not buying the nonsense of the fake science. Because the reality is, the good news is also this. The fake science, the academics, the only way they're surviving is by recruiting vulnerable elites. So what happens is an idiot goes to college to get some bogus degree. He ends up with $200,000 in loans, all right? Now, in order to get out of there and get a job, what does he have to do? He has to get A's, right? And how does he get an A? Well, he people pleases his professor who's sucking up to other people. So the entire system is based on one ass sucking system. So you have these students ass sucking up to their professors, and the professors are ass sucking up to the government to get grants. That's literally what's going on. And so by the time this kid gets out, he may have A's and B's, and then he gets a job in some place where he's really unqualified to have a job, and his employer has to retrain him again. That's what the actual funnel is going on among the millennial vulnerable elite. And that vulnerable elite are the ones who don't know any science, don't know any physics, can say, oh, yeah, don't worry, THC is fine, it's my opinion, right? So, no, that's what's going on.
Yeah.
But the average American worker, a lot of the people come to our campaign, electricians, 60% of the people came to me were working class whites. They weren't white liberals. You would think the white liberals should support me. They weren't. That shows that they're the real racists. So what we have in this country is a huge opportunity. And that's why 2020 is going to be important, because, there was an anthropologist who said it within the first 20 years of a country, or the first 20 years of a new, century, is the trajectory of that country determined. And we're coming down to 2020. Either we could head into the dark ages of giving people free shit away all the time and telling people that we should become like China, right? Dehumanizing innovations, watching everyone. That's what China's doing. China's not doing innovation. They're doing dehumanization. Putting up 28 million cameras with retinal scan is not innovation. That's called dehumanization. So the vulnerable elites want us to follow that model of centralization of power, Big Brother doing everything for you, not unleashing the spirit of the individual to stand up, to suffer, and to rise up to their best. And so I think 2020 is going to be a very important election for the entire century. It's not just about, my election, but it's going to be, so a guy like me running, I say this with all humility, is a huge opportunity for not only people in Massachusetts, but for this country, because I'm not going to run again. It's the last time I'm going to run. So people want serious change. They got to stop complaining, and they got to say, wow, this guy Shiva Ayyadurai is running. He came from nothing. He has an MIT PhD. He has actually real things. Why are we, this is like, different between coal and diamond, You want to choose an idiot like Ed Markey, who is built his entire career since 1976 in the Congress? Or do we want fresh people who actually know how to make stuff, who have a history of doing stuff? And I think that's what it comes down to. The good news is the American worker gets this. The issue is, will the Republican Party allow me to reach them? And the only way to do it is to go direct with guys like you. So that's why I was happy when Alan said we'd have a chance to spend some time with you today.
Well, and I really appreciated, I watched an interview that you had done with Anomaly, I guess was the guy's name. And, I was a little skeptical at first. Okay. I used to be a network admin and whatnot. I was in IT for a while. I got burned out on, well, what happened was I was sick for 15 years in and out of hospitals. And so I started this and started publishing books, et cetera, because I couldn't keep a job when you're throwing up all the time and in the hospital. So I was able to cure myself. And now I'm entering the 11th year of the show, but it turned out that, grains are one of the biggest poisons in the human diet. So once I cut the grains out and went to a high-fat diet, suddenly my health problems disappeared. So that was a big revelation for me. But it is all about the struggle and building yourself up and going through the fight, not having handouts and safe zones and all of this kind of stuff, which is the antithesis. I mean, these people are creating a system of self-imposed slavery, and where truth no longer matters. It's truth is by consensus.
Yeah, the good news is this. I mean, and you use the word slavery. The Climate of Science book, it basically proposes to the reader that we have a choice to choose freedom or slavery, and that's what this is really about. And it's a spiritual question too. Do you want to be a free human being, stand up on your own 2 feet? Because natural systems are quite resilient. We're quite resilient. We can handle a lot. The Earth can handle a lot, meaning that there are systems that have feedback systems that support. So these people would think, oh, we're going to destroy the Earth. They're complete idiots. They don't understand natural systems. A good bridge, it has a certain amount of wave, right? It knows how to handle, different types of wind. The stupid unnatural systems can't handle that. Natural systems can handle they have resilience if we apply nature's laws, So the issue is, like, you went through your health crisis, you figured out that ultimately comes down to understanding your body, what your body can take, eliminating these toxins that have never even existed in probably the history of, evolutionary history for long, long periods of time. They never existed. So the issue is to eat as much as possible these natural foods, understand your body as a system. When I was a kid, my grandmother was a farmer by day. On weekends, she was a local village healer. She practiced India's traditional system of medicine. And what I've been fortunate to be able to do is a new company we started, Cytosolve, and the educational institute we do call Systems Health. We actually teach everyday people how their body is a system, teach them the engineering principles of the body, connect it to traditional systems of medicine so they can figure out what works for them. Because there's no one diet, by the way. And ultimately, it's about personalized medicine, giving your body the right things at the right time, for the right person. So these are very, very simple systems, and that's what medicine should be about. It should not be about toking people up on drugs all day long. But I think I'm looking forward to this election cycle because we want to, one of our big enemies is white liberals. White liberals are the racists.
Absolutely, I agree with you, and I wish you the best of luck on your campaign. And I've been to Massachusetts a number of times in the last year and a half or so, and it's overrun with liberals who then, as California is, and then what happens is they bleed into surrounding states and alter.
I think we should call them racist. I don't think we should. I think we should just call them racists. That's what they are, because that's what they are, man. They are racist at the deepest level. They think working class white people are dumb. They're the smart ones. That's a form of racism,
Yep.
Segregation. They think, a dark-skinned Indian guy couldn't invent email. That's a form of racism, right?
Yeah,
but
absolutely.
they want people to shut up and they want people to follow their doctrines. That's a form of racism. I think calling them liberals is too nice, because real classical liberalism was actually pretty good. They're actually just racist. That's what they are.
Well, well said. And so, Dr. Shiva, thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate it. Sorry for the struggle. Again, the channel was demonetized. Apparently, the main channel, they've also shut off the live feed, which I was not aware of. And I'll have to test out what's going on. Even the backup channel, I checked it, and it says that the live feed is not shut down. So I'm not even sure why we can broadcast.
This is why, when you get a chance, this book won one of the small book awards. It's called The Future of Email. It's a different book I did a couple of years ago. One of the solutions I proposed is that the First Amendment can only be protected by we, the people, owning the infrastructure of communications. That was why Franklin and the founders set up the Postal Service. It wasn't just to send printed mail around. It was a foundation of the First Amendment, not just the Second Amendment. The Postal Service was set up so I could send you a piece of communication and no one could interfere. And if they did, it was 20-year sentence in prison. The Postal Service, I met with them in 1997 when I ran another company to do analysis of email, which was used to lower the cost of email processing by large companies. I grew that to around a $250 million company, did quite well. But in 1997, I met with the Postal Service and I said, look, you guys should offer a public email service in the spirit of what you were chartered to do. They thought, well, that's idiotic. We're in the mail business. We should do email. 2011, the Postal Service is going out of business. And I showed them that this would generate quite a bit of money for them, because I believed an American would pay probably about $50 a year to have an email service brought to you by the Postal Service, which would be protected. Forget encryption on all that. Anyone, Mossad can break encryption all day long. But the issue is, if I send you an email and anyone interferes with it, you could get a 20-year sentence in prison. So you have this way to actually stop intervention. What we did post 1997, when email volume overtook postal mail volume, is Gmail, Hotmail, all these guys started offering free mail, right? And we transferred our freedom for getting this free email, and they own all of our email. So we basically screwed ourselves as citizens. Forget them, we screwed ourselves, because we stopped demanding that the Postal Service do their job, which is to provide the infrastructure to protect the First Amendment. So my very simple and clear solution, and it's executable, is that all those Postal Service postal centers, they put up an antenna, okay? And it's called a mesh network. And that's a network not owned by AT&T or Verizon, et cetera, but it's owned by us as a people. And we all be given the capability where you can run your YouTube channel, you could, whatever, your Facebook, et cetera, brought to you by the Postal Service, because that was their charter. It's part of the American Constitution. So
that's brilliant.
That's what really, initially people say, what the hell are you talking about, the Postal Service? Because in their mind,
well, it makes total sense when you break it down and think about it, and, Franklin, granted, he brought us media mail and things like that to be able to ship books out all over the place for cheap. But, unfortunately on his dark side, he did have like 15, 17 bodies in his basement. But, it makes perfect sense that we would use the Postal Service, that they should have been the innovators of setting up email systems and things like that, so that when you get hackers and whatnot involved in your email, then it's a federal offense. That makes...
Because look, we're not going to, technology is always going to be leapfrogging itself. You do this encryption, someone will beat it. You do this, but the issue is you need to have a body of law. That's why the Postal Service was set up. Anyway,
so why didn't they jump on this?
Well, they did. So in 2011, I gave an interview to Fast Company and Time Magazine. It came out, the Inspector General, who oversees the Postmaster General, called me, Dave Williams, and he funded me to do 2 reports to show them how they could generate money. They gave me about $100K. I wrote 2 very, very good reports to the Postmaster. Nothing has happened with that. Now I've notified through some context of the Trump administration they should do this. And you've suddenly started to see the Postal Service potentially may do something. But the bottom line is, they know these solutions, but you got to understand that the deep state within the Postal Service, starting around Reagan's era, gutted the Postal Service, and they gave all the stuff to FedEx and DHL. The Postal Service was destroyed post-Reagan, and they gave the best parts of it to private companies. So that's what really took place. So my view as a postal service is the infrastructure that is sitting right there. Forget trying to, regulate Facebook and Google. It's never going to happen, and they'll always find another way out. The public needs to have its own infrastructure, and that is through the postal service. Anyway, I enjoyed the conversation. I hope anyone out there, our website is Shiva for Senate, and the book is The Climate of Change. The Climate of Science. Sorry. I think there's a link Alan may have sent you if people are interested in it. I think we're giving anyone who signs up early, we're giving them some significant pre-order discount. But I think it's going to be a great book because it's going to be the handbook for change, where people can read it, understand an issue, understand the left and the right views and what the real view is, or in some cases that we need to do more research, that some of these issues are not so easy to just put a single stake in the ground.
All right, Dr. Ayyadurai, thank you so much for your chat this evening. I really appreciate it. Have a good evening, and maybe we'll have you back again sometime. Thank you so much.
Great, thank you. Be well.
All right, bye-bye.